When we talk about living with heaven in mind, the first reality we must face is this life is temporary, but eternity is permanent. That's not a poetic phrase, it's a hard truth. Everything we see around us, the buildings, the achievements, the wealth we accumulate, even the bodies we live in, is fading. And yet most of our energy, most of our time, most of our anxiety is spent on these temporary things. We're working tirelessly for what we cannot keep, while often ignoring what we cannot lose. Think about it. The phone you hold today will one day be outdated. The car you drive will eventually rust and break down. The house you're so proud of will one day be someone else's possession or crumble into dust. Even the praise of people, the applause, the recognition you crave, it fades. A generation from now, maybe two, your name will hardly be remembered outside of family records. That might sound sobering, but it's not meant to discourage you. It's meant to awaken you. Because if life is this short, if the best of our years are like a vapor that disappears, then the real question is, why are we not living for what lasts forever? See, eternity is not a distant theory. It is the ultimate reality. Everything else is temporary scaffolding. Your career, your achievements, your social status. Those are shadows compared to the permanence of eternity. And if we're honest, and most of us live as if this life is all there is, we store treasures in bank accounts instead of storing treasures in heaven. We chase approval from people instead of living for the approval of God. We stress ourselves out about temporary problems without stepping back to see them in light of eternal significance. Philosophers throughout history have wrestled with this tension, the tension between the fleeting and the lasting. Socrates once said the unexamined life is not worth living, and part of that examination is recognizing how small our window of existence really is. Modern psychology echoes this too. People who are aware of the brevity of life often live more intentionally, more gratefully, more meaningfully. And they stop wasting time on trivial pursuits because they understand time itself is a currency that can never be refunded. But faith takes this even further. It doesn't just say life is short, it says life is preparation. This short life is rehearsal, not the final performance. When you begin to live with eternity in mind, your whole perspective changes. You no longer cling so tightly to possessions because you understand they're just tools, not treasures. You don't get as easily shaken by disappointments because you realize setbacks are temporary, but God's promises are permanent. Even relationships take on deeper meaning because you see people not as obstacles or stepping stones, but as eternal souls, souls that will last beyond time. Let me make it personal. Think about the last time you lost someone close to you. In that moment, the things that once seemed so important, money, job, status, suddenly felt small. What mattered most was whether that person knew God, whether they lived with heaven in mind. And what mattered for you was not the things you had, but the memories, the legacy, the eternal weight of love and faith. Death has a way of putting everything in perspective. It strips away the illusion of permanence. It reminds us that life, at its longest, is still fragile and short. But heaven reminds us that at the end. And here's the beauty. When you understand that eternity is permanent, you begin to live with freedom. You stop being enslaved to the opinions of others because you realize their words won't follow you into eternity. You stop chasing after empty pleasures because you know they won't satisfy your soul beyond this moment. You stop clinging to things that cannot last, and you start investing in things that will never fade. Faith, hope, love, obedience to God. That's what it means to live with heaven in mind. So I want to challenge you today. Where are you investing your life? Are you pouring yourself into what's temporary, or are you sowing into what's eternal? Because one day the lights will go out on this side of history. The applause will fade. The possessions will be gone. The titles will mean nothing. And the only thing that will matter is whether you live this temporary life with heaven in mind. Let me leave you with this thought. You only get one life, but it echoes forever. Don't waste it on what you can't keep. Invest it in what you can never lose. When you begin to understand that life is temporary and eternity is permanent, something profound begins to shift inside of you. Your priorities start changing. What once felt urgent no longer controls you, and what once felt distant suddenly becomes central. That's the power of perspective. Perspective doesn't just change how you see, it changes how you live. And when you live with heaven in mind, you don't waste your energy on what doesn't matter. You invest it in what will matter forever. Take a simple example. Imagine holding 2 glasses of water, one filled to the brim but leaking from the bottom, and the other half filled but sealed tight. Most people, without thinking, would go after the fuller glass, not realizing it's draining away. That's how we treat life. We pour ourselves into things that look full, but are leaking careers, possessions, recognition. We don't always notice the slow drip, the fact that these things cannot sustain us forever. But when you live with eternal perspective, you realize it's better to have something lasting, even if it looks smaller in the moment, than to pour yourself into what is inevitably slipping through your fingers. This is why people who live with heaven in mind make different decisions. They choose service over selfishness because service has eternal weight. They choose character over compromise because integrity doesn't expire. They choose relationships over recognition because people are eternal. Applause is not. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. That's the kind of wisdom Jesus was pointing to when he said, "Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy." He wasn't discouraging us from ambition, he was redirecting it. He was saying aim higher. Pursue what will outlast you. Now, let's be honest. Shifting your priorities isn't easy. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to chase more success, more comfort, more visibility. And let's be real, that voice is loud. It shows up in the ads we see, in the goals people around us celebrate, even in the silent competition we feel with our peers. If you're not careful, you'll spend your whole life climbing a ladder only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. But heaven shifts the wall. Heaven reorients the climb. Suddenly, it's not about being first in line on earth, but about being faithful in light of eternity. And here's where the psychological depth comes in. Modern research and happiness study shows that people who live with a sense of meaning, who prioritize relationships, generosity, and purpose, report far greater life satisfaction than those who only chase material success. Isn't that interesting? Science is confirming what Scripture has said for centuries. If you live only for yourself, you end up empty. But if you live for something beyond yourself, something eternal, you experience joy that circumstances can't take away. That's what happens when perspective shifts. Your priorities align with what your soul was designed for. Philosophically, this goes back to one of life's biggest questions: what is the good life? Every culture, every era has tried to answer it. Some say it's pleasure, some say it's power, some say it's knowledge. But if heaven is real, then the good life is not just about how much we acquire, but how well we align ourselves with God's eternal purposes. The good life is not measured in what we consume, but in what we contribute to the kingdom of God. And when your priorities shift like this, even ordinary moments take on eternal meaning. A conversation with your child becomes more than words. It becomes legacy. Helping a neighbor isn't just kindness, it's kingdom work. Resisting temptation isn't just self-control. It's a declaration of loyalty to God that echoes in eternity. Nothing is wasted when your perspective is eternal. Now, here's the tension. If we're honest, most of us know this, but we still drift back to old habits. Why? Because the temporary is loud and the eternal is often quiet. Bills shout louder than prayers. Deadlines demand more attention than devotion. Social media rewards you instantly while heaven feels distant. That's why this requires intentionality. If you don't deliberately choose to live with heaven in mind, the gravitational pull of this world will drag you into living for what doesn't matter. So, what does that look like practically? It means evaluating your daily life through eternal lenses. Ask yourself, does this decision draw me closer to God's purposes or further away? Does this use of my time build what lasts, or is it just noise? Does this investment, whether of money, energy, or attention, have any eternal weight, or will it vanish when the lights of this life go out? When you start asking those questions, your calendar changes, your spending changes, your relationships change, and eventually your legacy changes. You stop being consumed with building a kingdom of sand and start building a kingdom of stone, one that will outlast every storm. So I'll leave you with this challenge. Look at your life today, right now, and be brutally honest. Are your priorities shaped by earth or by eternity? Because you can't live for both. One will dominate, and the one you choose will define not just your life, but your forever. When most people think of heaven, they picture a far-off place, something waiting on the other side of life's finish line. But here's the truth. Heaven is not just a future destination, it is also a present mindset. To live with heaven in mind is not only to prepare for eternity, but to let eternity shape how you walk, talk, think, and respond right now. It's about pulling tomorrow into today, bringing eternal perspective into present reality. Think of it this way: when an architect designs a building, the final blueprint is already complete long before the first brick is laid. The workers may be dealing with dust, noise, and half-finished walls, but the architect already sees the finished structure. Living with heaven in mind works the same way. While life may feel like construction, messy, noisy, incomplete, God has already revealed the blueprint. And when you fix your mindset on heaven, you live not by what is unfinished, but by what is promised. This shift in mindset is powerful because it changes how you interpret life's challenges. Without a heavenly perspective, every setback feels final, every disappointment feels crushing. But when you know that heaven is real, suffering takes on new meaning. It is no longer wasted, it becomes a refining fire. Pain is not punishment, but preparation. Struggles don't define you, they shape you for eternity. That's why Paul could write, "Our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." Notice his language: eternal glory outweighs temporary struggle. That's the power of mindset. Now, from a psychological standpoint, we know that mindset determines resilience. Two people can face the same storm, but their perspective shapes their outcome. One collapses under pressure, the other grows stronger. Why? Because one sees the trial as meaningless, the other sees it as meaningful. Secular studies on resilience talk about meaning-making, the human capacity to endure suffering when it is connected to a larger purpose. But here's the thing, no meaning is greater than eternal meaning. When you attach your suffering to heaven's perspective, you unlock a depth of resilience that nothing on earth can match. This mindset also redefines success. Our world equates success with accumulation, how much you own, how much you earn, how much applause you receive. But heaven rewrites the equation. Success is not measured by what you gather, but by what you give. Not by how much you shine in front of people, but by how faithfully you reflect the light of God. Living with heaven in mind liberates you from the rat race because you stop comparing yourself to others and start aligning yourself with eternity. And here's something profound. A heavenly mindset is not escapism. It doesn't mean ignoring life's responsibilities or retreating from reality. On the contrary, it allows you to engage reality with greater clarity and courage. People often accuse those who focus on heaven of being so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. But the truth is, the most effective people on earth are those whose hearts are anchored in heaven. They are not easily swayed by trends. They are not enslaved by fear. And they are not derailed by temptation. They carry a peace that confuses others, a hope that doesn't fade, and a courage that endures. That's not detachment, that's focus. Philosophically, this is what gives life coherence. If you live only for the here and now, existence feels fragmented. Pleasures that fade, struggles that overwhelm, achievements that eventually slip away. But when you filter life through heaven's perspective, everything connects. Your work has meaning beyond your paycheck. Your struggles have purpose beyond your pain. Your love, your service, your faith, these things ripple into eternity. Life stops being random. It becomes part of a story that stretches beyond the grave. And practically, you begin to live differently. A heavenly mindset produces patience in traffic because you know frustration is temporary. It gives you grace in relationships because people are eternal. It fuels generosity because money is only a tool. It anchors you in prayer because you recognize earth's noise cannot drown out heaven's voice. Every ordinary moment becomes an opportunity to live with extraordinary meaning. But here's the challenge, the earthly mindset is loud. It shouts for attention through bills, deadlines, ambitions, and distractions. The heavenly mindset whispers through scripture, through prayer, through the still, quiet work of the Spirit. It takes discipline to tune your heart to heaven's frequency. It takes intentionality to pause, to reflect, to ask, am I seeing this moment through earthly eyes or through eternal ones? That's the choice every one of us faces. Will we live bound by the temporary, or will we live free in the eternal? Will we interpret life only by what we see or by what God has promised? Let me leave you with this. Heaven is not just where you go when you die. It's how you live while you're alive. And if you carry heaven in your mind, you will carry heaven into every moment, every decision, every trial, and every victory. Live with heaven in your heart now, and you won't just be ready for eternity. You'll transform how you walk through time. When you begin to see life as temporary and eternity as permanent, when your priorities shift and your mindset is reshaped by heaven, something deeper starts to take place. You discover purpose. And not just any purpose, but a purpose that is aligned with eternity. Because let's be honest, purpose without perspective is just busy work. But purpose anchored in heaven gives life direction, clarity, and weight. Too many people spend their days running hard without knowing where they're headed. They chase after career goals, accumulate achievements, even build reputations, only to wake up one day feeling empty. They've been climbing a ladder their whole lives, only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. That's what happens when your purpose isn't aligned with eternity. It might keep you busy, but it won't keep you fulfilled. God never designed you to drift. He created you with intentionality. You are not an accident. You are an assignment. Your existence is not random. It is deliberate. And the reason so many people feel lost or restless because they're trying to live life without tuning in to the author of life. They're trying to define their purpose by their own ambitions instead of discovering it in God's eternal plan. And philosophers throughout history have tried to answer the question of purpose. Aristotle talked about telos, the ultimate aim or end of a thing, what it was designed to do. A knife's telos is to cut. A seed's telos is to grow into a tree. And a human being's telos is to live in harmony with God's design. Modern psychology echoes this in its studies on meaning. People flourish when their lives are oriented towards something bigger than themselves. But here's the problem. If your purpose is built only on temporary things, even your greatest successes will eventually collapse. If your telos is money, then when money fails, your purpose crumbles. If your telos is fame, then when the applause fades, your identity disappears. Only an eternal telos can hold the weight of your soul. That's why aligning with God's eternal purpose is so transformative. It's not about finding just any purpose. It's about finding the right one. And when your life is aligned with eternity, you begin to live with a different kind of focus. You stop wasting energy on things that don't feed your calling, and you start investing in what God designed you to do. Your purpose becomes less about comfort and more about calling, less about success and more about significance, less about what you can gain and more about what you can give in light of eternity. Now, this doesn't mean everyone is called to the same thing. Some are called to preach, some to build businesses, some to raise children, some to create, some to lead, some to serve. But here's the common thread. Whatever your assignment looks like on earth, its deepest meaning is tied to heaven. Your work is more than a paycheck. It's a platform for faith. Your relationships are more than companionship. They are opportunities for eternal impact. Your struggles are more than obstacles. They are training grounds for spiritual maturity. Everything is repurposed when you see it through eternity. But here's where the challenge comes in. Purpose aligned with heaven often looks foolish to the world. The world celebrates accumulation, but heaven celebrates surrender. The world honors pride, but heaven honors humility. The world measures greatness by how many people serve you, but heaven measures greatness by how many people you serve. That's why living with eternal alignment requires courage. It means sometimes going against the grain, sometimes making sacrifices that don't make sense to others, sometimes choosing faithfulness over recognition. But here's the payoff. What you build with eternity in mind cannot be erased. Let's bring it closer to home. Think about how you spend your time. Are your hours consumed by things that will die with you or invested in things that will outlive you? Think about your talents. Are you using them only to advance yourself or to expand something bigger than yourself? Think about your trials. Are you seeing them as interruptions or as invitations to trust God more deeply? These are not small questions. They are eternal ones. And how you answer them determines whether your life is just activity or whether it is alignment. There's a deep freedom in living this way. When your purpose is aligned with eternity, you no longer feel the pressure to prove yourself to the world. You don't need every door to open because you trust the doors God opens are the only ones that matter. You don't fear failure because you know obedience counts more than outcomes. And you don't live in regret because every choice you make with heaven in mind becomes part of a story bigger than your own. Let me put it plainly, if you want to live a life that truly matters, stop asking, what do I want to do with my life? And start asking, what does God want to do with my life for eternity? That's the question that changes everything. So here's the challenge. Don't just live with purpose, live with eternal alignment. Because a purpose without eternity is just motion. But a purpose with eternity is mission. And mission leaves a mark that time cannot erase. Live aligned with heaven, and your life will echo far beyond the years you spend on this earth. When you begin to align your life with eternity, you realize something sobering but liberating. Every choice you make today echoes in eternity. Decisions are not isolated, they are seeds. And seeds, whether small or large, always bear fruit, sometimes in ways we can't see until much later. What you decide in the quiet moments, what you choose in the hidden places of your heart, carries weight far beyond this life. That's why living with heaven in mind isn't just about grand gestures. It's about everyday choices that ripple into forever. We live in a culture that often treats choices as disposable. If you make a mistake, you can delete it, erase it, cover it up, move on. But eternity doesn't work like that. Choices leave marks, they carve pathways. They form habits that shape character, and character shapes destiny. What you consistently choose, whether obedience or compromise, faith or fear, love or selfishness, eventually determines the direction of your life. You cannot sow selfishness and expect a harvest of peace. You cannot plant dishonesty and reap integrity. You cannot live for yourself and expect eternal rewards. Life is built on the principle of sowing and reaping, and eternity magnifies that principle to its fullest expression. Now, think about how often we minimize the power of small decisions. We convince ourselves that just this once won't matter. Just this one compromise, just this one word of bitterness, just this one moment of apathy. But the truth is, just this once can turn into just every time, and over time, those choices stack up into a life story. It's not the rare, dramatic moments that shape your eternity, it's the daily, ordinary ones. The habits you nurture, the words you speak, the priorities you set, these all carry eternal implications. Psychology supports this reality. Behavioral science shows us that repeated actions form neural pathways in the brain, making it easier to keep repeating those actions. In other words, your brain is wired to become what you repeatedly choose. If you choose bitterness often enough, bitterness becomes your default. If you choose gratitude often enough, gratitude becomes your perspective. Now add eternity into that equation, and you realize the stakes are even higher. You're not just shaping your personality, you're shaping your eternal trajectory. Philosophically, this truth dismantles the illusion of neutrality. We often like to think we're in a holding pattern, that we're waiting until later to make the big choices about God, faith, or eternity. But in reality, every day you delay, you're still choosing. Not choosing is a choice. Drifting is a decision. Neutrality is a direction. And without intentionality, the gravitational pull of the world will always draw you further from God, not closer. That's why Scripture constantly urges us to choose today whom we will serve, because the tomorrow we assume we'll have is not guaranteed. And this is where the weight of eternity presses in. When you make choices with heaven in mind, you begin to measure decisions differently. Suddenly, it's not just, will this make me comfortable? But will this glorify God? Not just, does this advance me? But does this advance His kingdom? Not just, is this easy? But is this eternal? Those questions change the way you live. They filter out the distractions and highlight what actually matters. Let me make it practical. Think about forgiveness. On earth, forgiveness often feels optional. You can choose to hold a grudge and life seems to move on. But in eternity, unforgiveness is poison to the soul. It stunts your growth and keeps you chained to the past. When you forgive, you're not just letting someone off the hook. You're aligning yourself with heaven's reality. Or think about generosity. To the world, generosity feels like subtraction. But from heaven's perspective, generosity multiplies. What you give is never lost. It's transformed into eternal treasure. Choices like these aren't small. They reverberate in heaven. And notice this, the choices that echo into eternity are rarely the glamorous ones. It's not just the big stages or the heroic sacrifices. It's the faithfulness in obscurity, the integrity when no one is watching, the prayers whispered in the quiet. Those moments may never trend, but they are recorded in eternity. They may not earn applause on earth, but they are celebrated in heaven. That's why Jesus said the last will be first. Heaven measures differently. So I want to press this question into your heart. What story are your choices telling? If the pattern of your decisions were played back as a movie, would it be a story of faith or fear, of love or selfishness, of eternal vision or earthly distraction? Because you're wanting that story one choice at a time. And the story you write here will echo there. Let me leave you with this. Eternity doesn't begin when you die. It begins with the choices you make while you live. So choose wisely, because what you decide today will echo long after tomorrow is gone.